On the icy streets of Chicago, Sam walked with slow, heavy steps, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Each step seemed to sink him deeper into the city's hard, relentless ground. He wasn't just an artist. Sam was a fighter, a survivor who painted his emotions on murals that few stopped to admire. Between the biting cold and the crushing loneliness, he kept creating, using colors as a way to keep himself standing, even when hope seemed like a distant and almost forgotten word. The nights were long, and the cold was unforgiving, but Sam endured. People passed by him without looking, without even noticing that there, amidst the alleys, a hidden talent was blossoming. He didn't want handouts, he never had. All he sought was recognition, a spark of human connection to validate his existence. But the city was harsh, indifferent, and over time, Sam learned to hide behind his paintings. He painted for himself, to remember he was still there. Sometimes, the wind brought not only ice but also a feeling of emptiness, of invisibility. No one knew Sam's story. No one knew how much he had lost to get there. The streets weren't his home, but, somehow, he had become part of them. The gray buildings and the bright lights of Chicago were the backdrop of his silent struggle. Between the cold of the walls and the warmth he tried to put in his murals, Sam found himself in a constant ebb and flow of thoughts. There were days when Sam questioned everything. What kept him alive? What was the purpose of continuing? He felt the pain of people's indifference, felt the weight of a life that seemed to have no more direction. But, deep in his heart, something still pulsed. Maybe it was love for art, maybe it was the determination that never let him give up. He kept going even if the world around him seemed not to notice. With each brushstroke, he connected with a version of himself that still believed in renewal. No matter how hard he tried, Sam couldn't erase the loneliness that accompanied him. Art was his refuge, but it didn't fill the emptiness he felt. The streets were barren of affection, and the cold, both physical and emotional, cut deep. Yet he persisted. The determination to continue was the only thing that kept him standing, and he clung to it with all his might. Deep down, Sam still nurtured a small flame of hope, even if it was hidden under layers of suffering. But not everything was so simple. Sam had scars that went beyond life on the streets. He had once been someone with dreams and a more ordinary life. However, fate had been cruel. He had lost everything, and that loss pushed him into the anonymity of the streets. His days were marked by internal battles, by the desire to find meaning amidst chaos. Yet each mural he painted was like a message to the universe, a silent plea for renewal. Even though hunger consumed him and the cold broke him, Sam refused to ask for help. Something inside him cried out for autonomy, for not depending on the compassion of others. He knew his talent was all he had, and that was what set him apart from the other anonymous faces crossing the streets of Chicago. He fought every day to preserve his dignity, even if, deep inside, he felt like he was falling apart. Days passed slowly, and Sam continued his silent journey through the streets. His murals were his trapped cry, his way of telling the world he was there, that he still existed. But who listened? Who stopped to notice the artist hidden in the shadows? The weight of invisibility crushed him, but he refused to disappear. Each day, he fought harder to keep going, to keep alive the small flame of hope still burning within him. Among brushstrokes and cold nights, Sam dreamed of something bigger. He dreamed of a world where his art was seen, where he was seen. But until that moment, all he had were the concrete walls that served as his canvas. The city was his audience, a mute and insensitive audience. Even so, he kept painting, determined to turn the gray of the streets into something more vibrant, more alive. Maybe one day someone would stop and see his work. Maybe one day someone would see him. And it was precisely at that moment, when the city's cold almost consumed him completely, that something unexpected happened. On a particularly cold day, while Sam was finishing a mural hidden in a narrow alley, he felt something different in the air. It wasn't the icy wind cutting his face, but the presence of someone silently watching. His fingers were stained with paint, the mural nearly complete, when he heard a gentle voice behind him. It was Elena, a young woman with a curious look and a discreet smile. She was there, admiring what he was doing, enchanted by the life Sam managed to put into his colors. Elena was not like other people who rushed by. She stopped. She saw. Her eyes lit up as she noticed the depth of Sam's work, as if the colors on the walls told stories she needed to hear. With a simple gesture, she approached, bringing a container with warm food. Sam was surprised, almost speechless. It had been a long time since anyone had offered him anything beyond looks of pity or disdain. That gesture rekindled something inside him, something he had almost forgotten. Sam looked at Elena, hesitant. Her gesture was as unexpected as the kindness that came with it. He didn't know how to react. Part of him wanted to refuse, to continue his life as he always had, alone, independent. But something in Elena's eyes, a mix of tenderness and understanding, made him hesitate. For a moment, Sam felt a spark of hope, that feeling that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Maybe there was still kindness in the world, and not just the cold he knew so well. Elena, without saying much, just smiled, handing the food over with simplicity. It wasn't about charity, it wasn't about pity. She wanted to give Sam something he hadn't received in a long time, recognition. She saw his value, his talent, and not just the lonely and shabby figure who lived on the streets. For Sam, that was more than an act of compassion. It was as if, suddenly, hope had started to flow through his veins again, renewing his determination to move forward, but this time with a glimmer of light on his path. Even so, Sam was confused. He had grown accustomed to the city's indifference, to the solitude of the streets. Accepting something from someone meant breaking a cycle he had created to protect himself. But there was something in Elena that he couldn't ignore. It was as if she saw beyond appearances, beyond the facade he maintained. Sam knew that by accepting that gesture, something inside him would change. The cold still surrounded him, but the small and fragile flame of hope began to warm his heart again. The warm food in Sam's hands represented more than just a meal. It was a symbol of a new possibility. Something inside him told him that this young woman was not just a stranger offering help. She was an invitation to something greater, a path he hadn't walked before. Art had always been his companion, but now he was faced with something more human, more intimate. Elena had sparked a flame he didn't know still existed within him. For a few moments, Sam remained silent, watching Elena. The young woman seemed as out of place in that alley as he was. But there was a difference. While he was trapped in the shadows, she brought with her a gentle light, a presence that warmed even in the biting cold of Chicago. Even with the warmth of the food in his hands, Sam felt a wave of uncertainty. He had spent years on the streets, relying only on himself to survive. Accepting Elena's help was opening a door to something he didn't know if he wanted or was prepared to face. The pride that had kept Sam standing until then weighed on his conscience. He looked at the food, then at Elena, and in a sudden impulse, he thought about giving it all back. Elena, however, continued to watch him with patience, without haste, without expectation. She seemed to understand, in some way, the internal battle Sam was fighting. And this silent understanding made him even more conflicted. He didn't want to depend on anyone, didn't want his life to be a succession of momentary aids. He had built his own strength, his own determination, from everything he lost. Accepting help, for Sam, was a symbol of weakness, something he avoided at all costs. Over time, Sam had learned that relying on others was a dangerous path. Many people offered help with ulterior motives, and he had been deceived before. The city taught him to be suspicious, to keep a safe distance. He had built walls around himself, walls that protected him from a vulnerability he couldn't afford. Hunger and cold were his constant companions, but Sam preferred to fight them alone than to be rescued by someone. Elena, however, seemed different. She didn't force her presence, didn't demand gratitude. She was simply there, calm, waiting for him to make his own decision. And that affected Sam in an unexpected way. He wasn't used to this kind of kindness, one that demanded nothing in return. But at the same time, the idea of accepting that help was a step outside the comfort zone he had built with so much effort. He was afraid of losing his dignity. The silence between them was filled with a gentle but significant tension. Sam knew that by accepting Elena's help, He would be breaking with everything he had built to protect himself. And at that moment, it felt unbearably difficult. He looked at the mural he had just painted, a representation of his struggles, his emotions condensed in colors and shapes. That work was the only thing he controlled, and the only thing that made him feel alive. He didn't want to lose that autonomy. No matter how much hunger gnawed at him, Sam hesitated to take the step. Accepting the food was more than satisfying a physical need. It was admitting that he needed something beyond himself, that perhaps the path he had followed so far wasn't enough. And this, for him, felt like a defeat. But deep in his soul, a small voice whispered that maybe it was time to make room for something new, for a renewal he resisted embracing. Finally, with a heavy sigh, Sam held the food back out to Elena. "I can't accept this," he murmured, feeling the weight of his own words. He knew he was rejecting more than a hot meal. He was rejecting an opportunity for change. Elena, however, was not offended. She just smiled with the same calm as before. "It's okay," she replied without pressure. She seemed to understand that Sam's battle went far beyond that moment, and she didn't judge him for it. Sam's refusal was not about Elena. It was about himself, about the fear of showing vulnerability, of depending on someone beyond his own strength. He had survived until then this way, and it was hard to imagine a different path. The determination that kept him alive on the streets now trapped him in a cycle he couldn't break. No matter how much he longed for a change, no matter how much the flame of hope was burning, he still clung to his independence, to his solitary struggle. As Elena walked away with a gentle wave, Sam stood still, watching her disappear around the corner. There was a mix of relief and regret in his heart. He knew the chance for change was right there, but, for now, he still couldn't take the next step. The cold wind cut his face again, reminding him of his reality. But something had changed. Sam's refusal, though firm, brought with it a new doubt, a restlessness he couldn't ignore for much longer. In the days that followed, Sam tried to return to his routine, painting his murals in the alleys of Chicago, distancing himself from the memories of his encounter with Elena. But something inside him had changed. His mind, once so focused on surviving one day at a time, now wandered constantly toward that young woman who had truly seen him. Her words, simple and sincere, echoed in his head as a reminder that there was something more beyond what he knew. And no matter how hard he tried, Sam couldn't ignore it. Elena began appearing more often, always unexpectedly, like a gentle breeze in the storm that was Sam's life. She never insisted, never demanded. She would just show up, bringing with her a smile or a word of encouragement, and then disappear again. But each time she visited him, Sam felt a small change within, as if his defenses were beginning to give way, little by little. And more than that, he felt a renewal in his soul, a desire to believe that perhaps his life could be different. Their conversations were brief but always profound. Elena had a worldview that contrasted with the harshness of the life Sam knew. She talked about art, about dreams, and about how the world was too vast to be defined by immediate circumstances. For Sam, who lived confined by the cold streets and his daily struggles, those words were like a breath of fresh air, a glimpse of something beyond the concrete of Chicago. For the first time in a long time, he began to wonder if there was still room for his own dreams. Unintentionally, Elena became a kind of mentor to Sam. Not in the traditional sense, but as someone who awakened in him a desire to reconnect with the part of himself he had abandoned. With each conversation, he felt that hope, an emotion he hardly recognized anymore, began to resurface. What impressed Sam most was that Elena never saw him as someone defeated. She always saw the artist, the creator, the one who had something beautiful and important to offer the world. Sam, who had spent so much time isolated, began to open up, even if slowly and cautiously. He spoke about his art, about what drove him to keep painting even when the world seemed against him. For Elena, his words carried the weight of someone who had lived and felt every stroke he placed on the walls. And she encouraged him, never making him feel pity for himself. Sam, for the first time in years, felt he had found a true connection. As the winter intensified, Elena appeared more frequently, bringing not only food but stories, ideas, and hope. Sam began to realize that, by accepting her presence, he wasn't giving up his dignity or independence. On the contrary, he was gaining something he had never allowed before: genuine support. And this began to shape his view of himself, his art, and the world around him. With each encounter, he became a little stronger, a little more determined. Elena didn't just encourage him to keep creating but also made him see his art in a new way. For her, Sam's murals were more than simple paintings in forgotten alleys. They were messages, expressions of hope and renewal amidst the chaos of the city. And little by little, Sam began to see that too. He no longer painted just for himself but for something greater. There was a purpose beginning to emerge, and this reignited his determination. Elena's words began to echo in his mind even when she wasn't around. The way she talked about dreams, about believing in something beyond immediate reality, stirred something in Sam. He began to realize that, no matter how difficult his life had been so far, there was still room for transformation, for overcoming. Elena inspired him to believe again, to fight for something he thought he had lost: the right to dream, to believe in a different future. Even as Elena got closer, Sam was still haunted by the shadows of his past. There was a lot of pain there, a lot of fear of opening up completely to someone. But Elena, with her patience and understanding, continued to be a constant presence, always ready to listen, always ready to offer words that sparked a small flame of renewal within him. And little by little, Sam began to realize that this flame was growing. What was once just a spark was now beginning to turn into something stronger. No matter how much Sam still resisted the idea of depending on someone, he couldn't deny the impact Elena was having on his life. She had become a light in the midst of the darkness he knew so well. And with that, Sam felt that something greater was coming, something he couldn't control but was ready to face. The hope that Elena had ignited in him continued to grow, and with it, the determination to change his own story. However, the calm that Elena brought to Sam's life was abruptly interrupted when Frank, Elena's grandfather, entered the scene. Frank was a powerful man, owner of vast wealth, and with a rigid worldview. When he learned that his granddaughter was spending time with a bum from the streets, his reaction was immediate and ruthless. To Frank, Elena's kindness was seen as a weakness, something that needed correction. He couldn't accept that his granddaughter was involved with someone so far removed from his elitist reality. Frank confronted Elena with a cruel plan, something that even Sam, in his worst nightmares, couldn't have foreseen. The magnate, full of disdain for Sam's condition, decided that the best way to teach Elena a lesson about the real world would be to force her to marry him. For Frank, the marriage between his granddaughter and a homeless man would be a lesson in reality, a way to show Elena that her compassion was useless. For Sam, this proposal was a direct blow to his dignity, something he didn't know how to process. At first, Sam was in shock. The idea of being dragged into this cruel game, like a puppet in Frank's hands, was unbearable. He had spent years fighting to maintain the little dignity he had left, and now he was forced into a marriage that represented everything he despised. However, the pain was not just for himself. Seeing Elena used as a piece in this dark plan hurt him deeply. Sam knew that she was as much a victim of her grandfather's cruelty as he was. Elena, in turn, was torn between her love for Sam and Frank's relentless pressure. Her grandfather had always controlled her life, and this was just another attempt to manipulate her. She knew that the arranged marriage was a form of humiliation, not just for Sam but for herself. Even so, Elena couldn't back down. She saw something in Sam that Frank could never understand: the beauty and strength of someone who overcame daily the obstacles life imposed. She couldn't abandon him now. As the forced marriage began to take shape, Sam felt increasingly cornered. The tension between him and Frank grew with each moment. He didn't want to be seen as someone passively accepting that fate, but he also saw no clear way out. Frank's power was overwhelming, and the elite of Chicago seemed to share the same cold, elitist vision of the magnate. With each step he took toward this marriage, Sam felt his hope fading again. Frank manipulated the situation masterfully, using his influence to ensure that everyone involved understood that this marriage was a farce, a cruel lesson for his granddaughter and for Sam. To him, the idea that someone like Sam could be beside Elena was laughable. He made sure to reinforce this message at every opportunity, mocking Sam, making it clear that he was nothing more than a disposable piece in this game of power. The humiliation Sam felt was deep, but Elena's constant presence beside him kept him steady, even if the flame of his hope wavered. Even with Frank's pressure, Sam began to see that this forced marriage could be an unexpected opportunity. He didn't know how, but something inside him told him that he could still turn the game around. The resentment and anger growing within him began to transform into something more, a fierce determination to fight against the injustices he was experiencing. Sam began to investigate Frank's past, something that until then seemed beyond his reach, but now appeared to be his only chance to regain control. As the wedding day approached, Sam faced a series of trials that challenged both his emotional strength and his determination. The elite of Chicago, with their arrogance and coldness, treated him as a joke. Each look of disdain he received was like a knife in his heart, but Sam kept his head held high, trying to keep his dignity intact. He knew he was being used as an example, a cruel lesson in Frank's hands, but he also knew he couldn't let that define him. He had something more to prove, not just to others but to himself. Elena, his only true ally in this sea of hostility, stood by his side. She supported him silently but consistently, her gaze always conveying trust and empathy. Although she was trapped in the same web of manipulation as Sam, her presence kept him steady. She was the thread of hope that kept Sam from completely succumbing to despair. Together, they faced the cold stares and whispers of contempt, knowing that there was more at stake than what others saw. Frank, on the other hand, continued to weave his web of manipulation with mastery. He saw Sam as an insignificant enemy, someone who could not offer real resistance to his power. To him, everything was under control. Frank manipulated everyone around him with the same disdain he held for Sam, using his influence to ensure the marriage was seen as a joke by society. He believed he was teaching Elena a lesson, but little did he know that something much bigger was about to be revealed. Meanwhile, Sam continued his investigations in secret. He had an intuition he couldn't ignore, a feeling that there were hidden connections between his past and Frank's fortune. The time he spent on the streets of Chicago gave him skills he never imagined using for anything beyond his daily survival. Now, he used these same skills to gather information, uncover the buried secrets of the city's elite, and little by little, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. Sam discovered that Frank's family fortune was not as immaculate as it seemed. Old documents, obscure contacts, and forgotten stories began to emerge. With each discovery, Sam felt his anger grow, but also an unbreakable determination to reveal the truth. He was no longer just fighting for his dignity but for justice. What began as a nightmare was transforming into an opportunity to expose Frank and unmask the hypocrisy of his wealth and power. The tension grew with each step Sam took toward the truth. He found himself at an emotional crossroads, between the fear of failure and the strength that came from newfound hope. Elena, even without knowing all the details of Sam's investigations, felt that something big was about to happen. She knew Sam was more than the humble man her grandfather despised. He was much more than that. And she was ready to stand by him, no matter what happened. While Frank believed he had total control of the situation, Sam prepared for the final confrontation. The evidence he had discovered, the connections he had made, all pointed to a truth that would shake the foundations of the life Frank had built. And with each new fragment of information Sam gathered, his determination grew stronger. He was ready to face his enemy, to expose the truth, and to reclaim the dignity that had been taken from his family decades ago. With the wedding quickly approaching, the tension reached its peak. Sam knew this would be the moment when everything would change. He was no longer merely surviving. Now, he was fighting for something much bigger than himself. Beside Elena, he prepared for the confrontation that would define his future, and the future of everyone around him. Frank, no matter how much he manipulated the situation, was about to discover that his power was not as absolute as he thought. With the truth in his hands, Sam prepared for the wedding day, not as a victim but as someone who was about to claim what was rightfully his. The wedding day finally arrived, wrapped in an atmosphere of almost palpable tension. Sam dressed in what had been chosen for him, But inside, he no longer felt like the same person who had walked the icy streets of Chicago weeks ago. As he prepared to face the ceremony, his mind was elsewhere, on the secrets he had uncovered and the truth that still needed to be revealed. The weight of responsibility was present on his shoulders, but at the same time, his determination shone brighter than ever. The hall where the wedding would take place was filled with Chicago's elite, all present more out of curiosity than respect. To many, this wedding was a tasteless joke, a distorted lesson in power and control imposed by Frank. They didn't see Sam as someone worthy of being there, much less as someone who could bring about any change. But as the looks of disdain crossed the room, Sam held his head high. He knew this moment was crucial, that he was about to reveal a truth that would change everything. Besides Sam, Elena tried to keep calm. She knew how manipulative and cruel her grandfather was, but she also knew that Sam was no ordinary man. She believed in him, believed in what they had built together, even if this journey had been full of pain and humiliation. Elena, with her heart full of hope, felt that something important was about to happen. And, no matter how frightening it was, she was ready to face whatever came, as long as she was by Sam's side. As the ceremony began, Frank looked at everything with the usual contempt. To him, this wedding was the pinnacle of his manipulation, the final lesson for his granddaughter and a demonstration of his absolute power over the lives of others. He believed that by forcing Elena to marry Sam, he was teaching a reality lesson. But Frank was unaware of what was happening behind the scenes, unaware of the discoveries Sam had made about his family's past. And, at that moment, Frank's blind confidence was his greatest weakness. During the ceremony, as the officiant's words echoed through the hall, Sam felt the weight of the moment increase. He knew he couldn't wait much longer. What he was about to reveal would change the course of the ceremony and their lives forever. With each passing second, the nervousness mixed with restrained anger accumulated within him. He was facing his ultimate trial, and the hidden cavern Sam was about to enter was not just a revelation of facts but a journey to confront the shadows of his past. As the wedding progressed, the tension was visible in both Sam and Elena. Frank, on the other hand, remained impassive, confident that everything was under his control. But Sam was no longer the man Frank believed he could manipulate. He had uncovered deep secrets about his own family, secrets that connected his life to that ceremony in a way no one there expected. The wedding, which was meant to be a humiliation, was turning into the stage for a revealing truth. When the officiant was about to conclude the ceremony, Sam felt that it was the moment. He looked at Elena, his heart beating strongly, and then at Frank, who smiled with his usual victorious air. But before any final words could be said, Sam broke the silence. With a firm and determined voice, he turned to the crowd, to Frank, and revealed what he had discovered, the truth about his inheritance and the role Frank had played in the decline of his family. The hall, once filled with laughter and discreet murmurs, was now in absolute silence. All eyes were fixed on Sam as he continued to reveal the truth that had been hidden for so long. The air was thick, and the tension grew with each word. Frank, who until that moment seemed unshakable, began to show signs of despair. His hands trembled slightly, his face lost its color, and his gaze, once arrogant, now searched for an escape. He hadn't expected a simple bum to piece together a past so well buried. Sam, however, was calm. His entire life up to that point had been a constant trial, an endless test of his endurance and strength. And now, in front of everyone, he felt stronger than ever. With the truth in his hands and Elena by his side, he knew he was about to reclaim not only his identity but also his dignity. Frank tried to interrupt him, but the room was too attentive, fascinated by the revelation. Sam had become the center of everything, and Frank, for the first time, no longer had control of the situation. Elena, beside Sam, felt her heart race. She had always known her grandfather was a cruel man, but she could never have imagined the extent of his manipulations. What Sam had revealed changed everything, not only for her but for everyone there. Frank was not the hero of his own story but the villain who destroyed many lives, including Sam's. Elena's gaze turned to her grandfather, and she felt a mix of anger and disappointment. The figure she thought she knew was falling apart before her eyes. Frank, now cornered, tried to react. He began to argue, to deny everything Sam was saying, but the evidence was there. Documents, accounts, proofs that connected the decline of Sam's family directly to Frank's unscrupulous actions. The elite of Chicago, who once revered him, now began to murmur. People exchanged glances, incredulous at what they were hearing. Frank's reputation, built over decades, was crumbling in a matter of minutes. And Sam, the one they had so despised, was in full control of the situation. Frank's humiliation was visible, and Sam knew this was the decisive moment. He continued to expose the secrets, revealing details that showed how Frank had manipulated, lied, and stolen to build his fortune. The anger inside Sam was present, but that wasn't what drove him. What moved him now was justice, the need to correct what had been taken from him and his family. He didn't want revenge, he wanted truth, he wanted liberation. And at that moment, by exposing Frank, he felt he was finally in control of his own destiny. The hall, once filled with contempt for Sam, now began to change its attitude. The bum from the streets had transformed into something much greater, a silent hero who fought against all odds to reclaim what was his. The elite, so quick to judge, now began to see Frank for what he really was. The power he displayed was nothing more than a facade built on lies and betrayal. And in the midst of all that tension, Sam remained steady, knowing he had reached the peak of his journey. Elena, now with tears in her eyes, held Sam's hand. She didn't need to say anything. The gesture was all he needed. The connection between them was stronger than any manipulation by Frank. The love that had blossomed between them was not born from an arranged marriage but from a shared struggle, from a mutual compassion that surpassed any external circumstance. And at that moment, holding Sam's hand, Elena knew she was beside someone who had overcome the impossible. Feeling control slipping through his fingers, Frank made his final move. He stood up and began to shout, accusing Sam of being a liar, of having made everything up for his benefit. But his words no longer carried the same weight. The mask had fallen, and the truth was in plain sight for all to see. Sam didn't need to respond. The silence in the room was proof enough that Frank was finished. He had nowhere else to run, and each attempt at defense only sank him further. Finally, Sam looked directly at Frank, without anger, without resentment, just with the certainty that he had won. He didn't need to say anything more. Frank's judgment was taking place there, in front of everyone, and Sam knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. What began as an attempt at humiliation had turned into Sam's redemption, the reclaiming of his story and his identity. With silence filling the hall, Sam finally felt the weight of years of pain and humiliation begin to dissolve. It was as if a massive chain had been broken, freeing him from a past that had always imprisoned him. He was no longer the invisible man on the streets of Chicago, ignored and despised. Now, he was back in his place, not only as the heir to a family that had been dispossessed but as someone who fought for justice and dignity. The greatest reward he received was not financial. It was the respect, the freedom to be who he truly was. Elena, with tears in her eyes, smiled beside him. For her, that moment was not only Sam's victory but also her own liberation. Beside him, she had rediscovered her power of choice, her own strength. Frank, who had always manipulated and controlled her, was now exposed by his actions, and Elena felt that, for the first time, she could live her life without the weight of her grandfather's shadow. She looked at Sam, and the love between them was stronger than any conspiracy, stronger than any circumstance. As Sam descended from the makeshift altar where the truth had been revealed, the gazes of Chicago's elite, who once despised him, were now filled with respect, and perhaps even shame. They, who always judged appearances and status, now saw the truth behind Frank's manipulations. Sam was not just the beggar they believed him to be. He was a man who had risen against adversity, a man who had fought for what was right, and for that, he was now worthy of his place in that society. The greatest treasure Sam reclaimed at that moment was not the money or the fortune of his family but his own identity. He had been forced to live in the shadows, never knowing the full extent of his story. Now, with the truth finally revealed, he felt whole again. It wasn't just about restoring his family's reputation but also about rediscovering himself. Every mural he painted on Chicago's streets, every color he placed on a gray wall, now seemed to be part of a larger picture, a story of overcoming and renewal. The reaction of the elite, though initially silent, began to shift into murmurs. Some moved away, trying to digest what they had just witnessed. Others approached Sam and Elena, not with the same arrogance as before but with a new dose of respect and even admiration. They now saw what they hadn't been able to see before, the strength of a man who fought the impossible and won. And beside him, a woman who, with compassion and empathy, believed in him when no one else did. Frank, defeated, was still in shock. He couldn't process what had happened. All his life, he believed that power was in his hands, that he could control those around him with money and influence. But there was Sam, someone he had underestimated, now triumphant. The truth hit him with full force. His manipulation had been exposed, and his reputation was ruined. Frank tried to pull himself together but knew he had lost everything. Sam had not only reclaimed what was his but also the respect of everyone Frank had always tried to dominate. The ceremony, which had begun as a farce, was now a celebration of truth. The marriage, initially planned as a way to humiliate, had turned into something much greater. Sam and Elena, united not by Frank's imposition but by a genuine bond of love and trust, were ready to move forward together. Their union was stronger than any conspiracy, more authentic than any alliance of convenience that Chicago's elite could imagine. As they left the hall, hand in hand, Sam felt a deep sense of peace. He had achieved something that, for so long, seemed impossible. His battle for truth, for dignity, and for justice had ended, and he emerged victorious. Now, his life was no longer marked by pain and loneliness but by hope and renewal. Elena's love beside him was the greatest proof that he had changed, that his journey of overcoming had led him to a place of freedom and triumph. With the truth exposed and the past finally unearthed, Sam and Elena left the wedding hall with a new purpose in their hearts. The path back to the world seemed different now, less dark, more filled with possibilities. Sam was no longer the invisible man of the streets, and while Chicago remained as cold and relentless as ever, something inside him had changed forever. With each step he took beside Elena, he felt the weight of his past fading, replaced by a new sense of responsibility and purpose. As he adjusted to the new reality, Sam began to reflect on how he could use his newfound fortune and influence. He didn't want to lose himself in the same elitist world that had once despised him. On the contrary, Sam saw his new position as an opportunity to help those who, like him, lived on the fringes of society. The streets of Chicago, which once swallowed him, now called him back, but not as a victim. He wanted to return as someone who could bring change, as a voice for those who were also invisible. Elena supported him in every step of this new journey. She knew that Sam would never be the typical heir to a fortune, nor someone who would simply settle into his new position. Instead, he chose a path of empathy, using what he had learned in his life of trials to build something better. Together, they began planning ways to give back to the city that, despite everything, had shaped them. Sam felt that his purpose was greater now, not only about him or his inheritance but about the many who still struggled as he once did. One of Sam's first initiatives was creating a community center dedicated to art and expression for homeless youth. He knew, from his own experience, the power of art as a form of healing and as a way to resist adversity. The idea of creating a space where young people could paint, draw, and express themselves, without judgment or limitations, filled his heart with hope. To him, art was more than just colors on a wall. It was a way to transform pain into something beautiful, to give voice to those often silenced. As the community center began to take shape, Sam also decided to use his new influence to promote structural changes. He wanted to fight for policies that would help the marginalized find real opportunities for a fresh start. He knew the path to overcoming wasn't easy, but he believed that with adequate resources and genuine support, it was possible to build bridges between those who lived in the shadows and a better future. The life that once oppressed him now became his inspiration to help others find their own redemption. Sam's return to the world, now as an influential figure, wasn't about ostentation. He remained the same humble man with the heart of an artist, but now equipped with the means to make a real difference. Every mural he painted on Chicago's streets was a reminder of where he came from, and every new project he started was a step toward a fairer future. He refused to forget the lessons he had learned during his years of struggle, and instead of distancing himself from the streets, he embraced them as a fundamental part of his journey. Elena, by his side, became deeply involved in his projects. The community center became not only an initiative of Sam but also a shared project between the two, a symbol of everything they had built together. The marriage that began as an imposition of power had now transformed into a union based on love, respect, and shared purpose. Together, they found ways to turn pain into renewal, to use their experiences to create something that would impact lives positively. Over time, Sam became a respected figure, not just because of his fortune but because of how he chose to use it. His determination to make a difference, even after facing so many trials, inspired those around him. The elites who once despised him now saw in him an unstoppable force of hope and justice. Sam, however, never sought external validation. His greatest reward was seeing the lives he managed to touch and the opportunities he helped create for those who, like him, had once been forgotten. As Sam walked back into the world, he carried with him the certainty that, no matter how difficult the circumstances, overcoming was possible. He and Elena, united by unbreakable bonds, now looked to the future with the determination to build a legacy, not of power but of compassion and renewal. Sam's journey back, filled with challenges, was now also filled with promises, not only for him but for everyone who once also fought for their own dignity.